Thank you for being here. I want to appreciate your time for being here. So, 9/11, your first birthday, the Iraq War, your first pet. For some of us, your first marriage or your second marriage. London, the Denver Broncos. When I say those terms, for many of you, when I said it, a still image came to mind. Because we think and process and recall via still images. We don't do a video clip. It's amazing. We're a visual society. We're inundated on a daily basis with incredibly high quality imagery, vast majority being snapshots. I want to talk about photography tonight. I love what I get to do. I'm astounded by what I get to do. And I look back on what drove me into the business of photography. And I know as a kid, I grew up in Austin, Texas, and my dad had gotten 2 books when he was a kid, when he was younger, not a kid, called U.S. Camera and U.S. Camera at War. And we had those books at the house all the time, in addition to Life magazine. And I remember looking at those, always being gravitating towards those books, and looking at those frozen moments, and just being stunned by it. So I just shot these today on my iPhone, because I found those 2 books. They're almost disintegrated now. But these are the 2 books that drove me completely. And I just took a few pictures. They're not very good quality on this, but it was that frozen moment that just blew me away. Look at that. That's just beautiful photograph. I remember looking at those as a kid, and I didn't realize what impact it was having on me. But it was going through and looking at those images. Look, isn't that amazing photograph? This is from World War II when it was speed graphics and 1 frame at a time. And you talk about working on moment and timing. But it was also a look at life in general, what's happening right in front of us. I consider myself a generalist as a photographer. People say, well, are you a war photographer? No, I was a photographer covering the war. Am I a wildlife photographer? I photograph wildlife if it's part of my narrative. And that's what I love about it, is this always different work. But I would look at these and I studied them. I didn't realize I was studying them. I wasn't that bright a kid. But it had an impact on me, and this is what really sent me into it. So I went to school. Oh, and it was my first time to see an Ansel Adams picture. This was like 1950, mid-50s, late 50s. And it was my first time to see moonrise over Hernandez. So these things were impacting me without knowing it. I went into college, English Lit major. So I don't see what I do as that entirely different from English literature. I'm still working with narrative. I decided about 3 years into my college career as an English Lit major, that just about killed my dad right away. He came from that world where I should have gotten a job with a company, stayed with that company until I retired, gotten a gold watch. I told him I wanted to teach English Lit. That about did it. And then about 3 years into my college career, I decided I wanted to be a photographer. I remember in high school, I had a Kodak Instamatic. I don't know if you remember that big picture in the middle with me holding that silly camera. That was a enlarged version of Instamatic. But I had friends who had dirt bikes, motorcycles, and I couldn't afford one of those, so I'd go out with them and take pictures with my Instamatic. And the same thing, I remember getting those prints back and looking at them and going, oh my God. And the sales lady at the store was very sharp. She said, if you had this fancy camera, you could do a really good job, and sold me on it and went on. So I got into the decision making of I was going to be a photographer. And my book, everybody's got a book here, right? My book consisted, I had 3 pictures in it. And I had the nerve to approach photographers, high caliber, well-known photographers in Dallas, which was a pretty heavy duty market. Called them and said, can I come by and show you my book? A few of them didn't laugh at me. They looked and said, well, here's what you need to improve upon. And then I went further. I went to the news agencies, AP and UPI, and I went to the newspapers, small papers, and I thought, what the heck? Let me go to the big papers, the Dallas Morning News and the Dallas Times-Herald. Went to both, and the Morning News kicked me out. Times-Herald, the guy felt sorry for me. He said, well, if you had some sports in your body of work, it would help. So I thought, well, where do you get to be a sports photographer? You look in the classified ads, somebody wanting a sports photographer. Sure. So a couple of months I was watching the ads, never saw it. Then one day I looked and there was a job wanted for a sports photographer. So I called the guy, and he was starting a brand new sports agency. I went over and interviewed, and it was a tough as hell interview, I'll tell you what. It took a while to go through the winnowing process to decide who they were going to be, because I was the only applicant. Nobody else. And he paid me $5 a game to go photograph Southwest Conference football, basketball, pro basketball, all these kind of things. But I was building a book. So I built my book, went back to the Times Herald, showed the guy, so this looks good. About 2 months later, he called and said, we have an opening. And I was scared to death. This was on Wednesday. And he said, can you be in on Monday? I was like, yeah. So Friday came, and I had my hand on the phone. It's one of those moments in your life, you know, if I picked up that phone, I would have dialed the phone. He would have answered. I would have said, I can't do this. Had my hand on the phone, thought, no, I'm going to give it a try. So I went in Monday, and the first photographer to who they introduced me was Bob Jackson. Bob Jackson took the photograph of Lee Harvey Oswald being executed by Jack Ruby. I realized as I was in way over my head. But it was an amazing learning ground, because you had to shoot 3 to 5 assignments a day. There were no excuses. They had to produce. It was a sleepy afternoon paper. About a year after I got there, the LA Times Mirror came in and bought them. They called me in and they said, we want to make this paper a morning paper. We want to make it domestically, US-wide, a impactful paper, and we want to do international work. So what I'm going to show you is a bunch of, I think we saw this one. That's me on the right there. This is early in my newspaper career. But newspapers are incredible because you had to produce, and you had to produce feature pictures. These two guys were at a mystical and occult festival waiting introduction. And I started learning to use certain dynamics within a photograph to make my audience look at it. One was humor. This guy's in a rodeo clown school. He's on his first day of class. He's trying to figure out where the bull is. The point is that it's been proven that whether it's looking at your website, whether you're looking at your book, whether you're looking at National Geographic, your audience, or an advertisement, your audience is going to give your picture about a half second of attention unless you do something to engage them. So I was working with the graphics. You had to fill the paper with images at times, feature photography. Driving back one night and saw this guy sandblasting a street. Oh, and they would run it because they realized how important visuals are to us. And then politics, that's Ronald Reagan, and this is when John Connally, who was running against him for the Republican nomination for president, this is when Connally conceded the nomination to him. I just love this dynamic of the two of them. And what this business is about, above all, is moment. Moment drives everything. You'll hear me mention a lot. And you were looking for those funny scenes, and when you saw something that made you go, wow, or made you laugh or react, think about photographing it, because for some reason it's working. And I photographed an Iranian protest march in Dallas, and this late that night on a Saturday, we sent it on the drum out to see for the world and see who's going to publish it. On the Wire, it was called. And I was watching Saturday Night Live, and really way back, this was in the 70s, and Chevy Chase was reading the update news, and my picture appeared. He said, oh, wow, there's my picture. He was reading the news. He said, today in Dallas, the Ayatollah Khomeini lost a contact lens. Has nothing to do with, but it was looking for humor. But these were feature photographs, so they're very different because there were kind of 3 components of newspaper photography. And it's interesting, I bring up a lot of this newspaper work because most National Geographic photographers come from newspaper backgrounds. Why? Because you're used to working with visual narrative on a daily basis. Do you remember I talked about how important visuals are to us? And if you ask me a question at the end of this and I go, what? It's because I used to photograph rock and roll. This is part of the feature stuff too. This is part of feature photography. So it was Janis Joplin. It was Johnny Rotten and the Sex Pistols. It was the Stones and the Who, all these different groups. And these things, it's funny because these are selling now as fine art prints. I have a gallery called Morrison Hotel Gallery that represents this stuff. The Stones in Dallas in the rain. But it was always about looking for that moment. Especially in reportage, documentary, photojournalism, every photograph has a moment. And that's what you're looking for, that peak image. This is Sammy Hagar. I'm shooting this with a 24. Most of you are photographers. And one thing the camera's done for me is given me this incredible confidence. Just had an email come in. This incredible confidence to go up to people, approach people, to walk into many situations. Walk out on the stage with a 24. Sammy's reeling away, and it's just like, oh, ignore me for a minute here. But again, this is what I love about the camera because it's allowed me to get into people's lives. And Chuck Berry doing the duck walk. But this is all feature photography, and ZZ Top, and then Led Zeppelin on their first American tour back in 1969. I'm really going to date myself here. But this is all that feature photography thing. So this was all a learning experience. I mean, one thing I was going to tell you all that I think is important. You all are in this incredible place in your lives, the students out here. You have a whole system built around educating you within this field in which you show interest. If you're not taking advantage of everything, I can't tell you how much I look back upon my own college career of language, and for me, English literature, of a liberal arts degree, learning how to write, how to make proposals, because I do a lot of proposals in geographic and all. These are critical things. You have this incredible support system, and if you aren't taking advantage of it, it's not a good thing. But telling stories, so I'm at a Willie Nelson picnic, and you step back to do the big picture, and I'll talk about visual narrative a little bit further here. But you've got it for your audience. You've got to tell them what the situation is, where you are. People say, wow, you get a 28-page story in National Geographic. I could tell my life story in that. Well, 28 pages is 14 spreads. And 14 spreads is shared with this stuff called text, which we all don't like. So it becomes in that 28-page spread, that's maybe 8 or 9 photographs. What you have to build, especially with geographic, is a connectivity of one image to the other. What is the connective tissue that's holding these things together? And a huge part of it is narrative. So I'm shooting wide at Willie Nelson picnic, then I come in closer. And what I still like about this photograph is it, to me, illustrates what I love about still photography. It's that frozen moment. You can see the guy's expression. They're throwing themselves in the air, they're drunk and high and all this stuff, and there's broken glass and there's mud, and it's awful. But you see the guy's face, you see the curvature in his body. What still photography has that video and film will never replicate is intimacy of moment. Because look at that photograph, we pick it up, and it's so very personal. So now I'm taking my viewer on, so 3 pictures, we ran 4 pictures on this story. You shoot for hours, and you whittle it down to what groups of pictures you want to show. Then I get in closer to one of the participants, and I'm sure she's drinking water to refresh herself. But something else I learned to do too early on in the career, as for me, that works very importantly, is this idea of trying to crop when I shoot. Of course we all crop, especially in this business, especially in wildlife and sports. But I think if you force yourself to crop when you shoot, if you can, don't miss a moment. For God's sakes, don't miss a moment. But if you crop when you shoot, it teaches you to see more photographically. And that makes you become a better photographer when you realize that edge of the frame is a border of your canvas, that you're responsible for everything going on in that image. Sports gave me timing. So I had to shoot sports. I shot NFL football for years. I shot Major League Baseball, everything else. And sports was all about, and it didn't have to be pro sports. It's a silly moment, I think I mentioned that word, of a kid at a golf tournament missing the putt and his mom's reacting in the background. Or it was a New York Giants field goal kicker. I was back in Dallas at this time, missing the field goal that would have beat the hated Cowboys. And you'd shoot a game for 3.5 hours, and you'd come back in and they'd say, where's the moment? Where's that one picture that defined the whole thing? Like that game this weekend, if anybody watched the Miami Patriots game. On the last play, that was it. That was the whole game. Or father and his kid in a marathon. Or Roger Staubach from way back breaking 2 ribs against the Redskins. And again, kind of the whole game was like, didn't matter. You come back in, do you have that moment? So the pressure, so that's where a newspaper was an incredible learning ground for me. And again, I'll talk about that in a minute. But the beauty of sports too, it was so lyrical and just flying and athletes and all this kind of stuff. And a football player with TCU that would pray after every touchdown. I just love the moment of the ball coming off his fingertips. So I was always watching through and I think you become a better photographer the more you know the camera, where the camera gets out of the way. The more you know it, I don't care what camera you shoot with. I've got my iPhone in my pocket. It's one more tool in the bag. Show me the work. Show me your picture. Don't tell me what a cool camera you have. Show me your work. And the more you understand the more you know the rules of photography, the more you know when to break them when it works. And remember the Jamaican high jump team. And again, shoot at a high shutter speed so you can look at her face, you can see the musculature in her arm, you can see all that stuff. And it's so personal. Isn't it wonderful to be able to pick up that photograph or look at your monitor and come in close and look at the beauty of the moment of the dance? I almost think that photographers are like choreographers. We're watching this dance occur in front of the camera, and you're watching for that peak moment. And then spot news. News taught you to see situations in potentially dangerous situations. I'll show some stuff that I won a prize for a few years ago. But this is working with graphics. And it's interesting to me, too, that the Wall Street Journal many years ago used to not run photographs because they felt that they wanted the gray area of text. And also the editors didn't want to run photographs because they didn't want to deal with photographers. But recently they've started putting photographs. In the past number of years, they've been running photographs because they know how critical they are to us. And this lady was in her mobile home when it was destroyed by a tornado. And I was out there talking to her, and I turned around to walk off, and I thought, I've got to get her name, and look back. There's a moment. And they exhumed Lee Harvey Oswald's body, the guy who killed President Kennedy. And everybody was trying to figure out what's going on, where are they going to take the body, because they drove him from Fort Worth over to Dallas. And I was talking to my photo editor, it's like, God, could they take him back by the school book depository building? So I was the only one over there for like 3 hours, nothing. Finally, I looked up, and I'm walking down the grassy knoll, remember reading that? And I see the hearse coming, so I go running in front of it. They had to slam his brakes on, turn around, photograph the hearse with Lee Harvey Oswald at the same spot where he shot Kennedy from the building in the background. So just kind of a full circle. In Dallas, when this guy had a bunch of horses he wasn't feeding, this young lady from the local Humane Society was crying when the horse was dying in front of her. But I'm watching this horse in the background, a critical component on this, to have that filled because it's a layered photograph. You're responsible for everything going on in that photograph. And then a funny moment in kind of a sad situation, a guy getting stuck trying to get out of his flooded car. And boy, talk about, it's tough picking up that camera sometimes. You sometimes, especially as a photojournalist, reportage, documentary photographer, you're in situations that are very volatile, very sensitive. This officer is crying at his buddy's funeral. When do you have the right to photograph someone, and when do you not have the right? But there's a famous photographer named Eddie Adams who photographed a Viet Cong suspect getting shot in the head, very classic photograph. And Nick Hutt, who photographed a young Vietnamese girl running napalmed in the Vietnam War, those two photographs made in the Vietnam War. And those two photographs have been attributed to helping to bring that war to an earlier close. This is a powerful medium. There have been more journalists killed the last couple of years in Iraq and Afghanistan and over in those conflicts than kind of in the history. And many regimes are realizing what a weapon the camera is. Peter Gabriel, who was a musician from years ago, started a foundation called Witness that he was working on at that time getting just cell phones with cameras in relief workers' hands who were on the front lines of human rights violations. And because he realized the importance of it, well, that was discovered quickly. And it can be very, very volatile. And then one of the last casualties from the Vietnam War coming home and his family saying goodbye in front of the grave. So I love the little flicked up coattail on the guy, just that little moment. Again, what I hope you go from this talk I'm doing is maybe looking at pictures a little bit differently. When you see a good photograph, stop and think, what's drawing me into that image? And one of my first volatile situations was in Dallas. It was a young Hispanic youth, 8 years old, was picked up by police on suspicion of stealing 85 cents from a Coke machine. And they decided to interrogate him by doing Russian roulette with a pistol, and they killed him. And the next week, a community turned out. It was my first time to see something like this, to start to see a crowd turn into a mob. And they raced through City Hall, back down to, they marched peacefully through town to a parking lot, then came to City Hall, then came racing back to City Hall and attacked the cops around there. And I'm shooting with a 20 millimeter. I'm right in there. I wasn't smart enough. And I'm kind of pushing closer and closer. Excuse me, oh, I need to get in closer, because the camera protected me, right? I'm a journalist. You can't include me in this. I'm not part of this. Till this kid hit me with a chain. Excuse me. And I've got a bit of a temper, and I grabbed him, and I was going to, but something really sunk in that took a while to come to fruition, and that's that we are part of this fabric of what's going on. You don't divorce yourself from reality because you've got a camera, and you're constantly making those decisions on what you have the right to photograph, what you don't have the right to photograph. Guy throwing this is one of those pictures, oh my God, look at that, bring it up and shoot on the way up. Just trying to get that moment when he's throwing a trash can through the window. And I had to testify against this guy in court. He was a third-term felon, and his buddies were outside, so it was not a pleasant thing. I worked in El Salvador. I worked in Central America, and I hope that's the next group of pictures. And I photographed the war there. And El Salvador was an interesting dynamic in that it was very easy to get to. It was relatively cheap to get to as a photographer. And a lot of young photographers who had not had experience in volatile, tense situations thought this is a way to make my name in the business. This is the way to get down there cheap, get some great stuff, get in the middle of some action, come out, I'll have made my name. And a lot of these people were very much a liability because you travel in groups. And it would be a very dangerous situation. I had covered a number of fairly volatile situations. I hope this is a group. Nope. I'll jump to that next. But after I got to the Herald, after the LA Times Mirror came in and said, we're going to turn this national, it was amazing because I was in my early 20s, and they wanted me to start covering stuff on a moment's notice. Santa Fe prison riot, leased a Learjet to fly out there from Dallas. And you're trying to create these images that tell your audience what's going on with this thing, and the families coming in. And then at the end of the ride, it was a horrific event. I wouldn't go in. I'm just showing a few photographs in this. But these were some of the things I was moving on quickly. Then the Salvador stuff. So I won a Pulitzer for this in 1983. It was 13 photographs. I submitted this. Come on, you can do it. We use this as an opening picture in this layout. We used the whole top half of the front page so there'd be no way our audience could ignore it. This guy was a death squad victim. We found this place. They kind of made a movie about this whole situation. It was a place called El Playon, where they were taking death squad victims. We were the ones that discovered it, the writer I was working with. We went out there. It was out in the middle of nowhere. And we saw this, and we saw another thing, and we found 53 bodies in varying degrees of decomposition from immediately executed to days before. But these are some of the photographs from that coverage out of that 13-picture series. And I don't include all because there's some really dark things. So it had to do with this, El Playon, it had to do with death squads and Election Day shootout. And boy, you talk about a tough one. I was out one morning and saw this group in a barrio of San Salvador standing in front of a house. And death squads had executed this guy and told the family, leave him there, don't touch him. So next morning they took him in, laid him on the kitchen table. And I saw this and went down there. My Spanish was pretty good and asked if I could go in there. And it's a tough thing. I mean, cameras are really intrusive. You know, think of the terms. We shoot your picture. We're going to take your photograph. You pick that up, it can be a fairly aggressive motion when you do that. So you really try to be as cautious as you can. An Election Day shootout when a group of guerrillas had tried to create a disruption around the polling headquarters to scare people away. They were discovered by the military, and it turned into a wholesale slaughter of these people. We saw them executing people in front of us. There were 2 other photographers and a film crew there. And it was awful. And I think that self-defense that camera can offer became almost a lifesaver mentally on this thing because you saw such horrific things happening. In the middle of this little metal shack was there, and this couple was in it, full of bullet holes, and the soldiers were still in this red zone mentally where they were killing people, and they saw this and kicked the door open. They were dragged them out. They were going to shoot them, and we had cameras in their faces. We had guns in our faces, cameras in their faces. Finally, they let her go, and this is when she's passing out when they lift her off the ground. And just a very simple picture of a father carrying his child home. And it comes a little bit more upbeat from this. This was the last picture in the series. It's a refugee camp in Honduras. This is a young lady, her family had escaped the war. Ended the story on this. And part of the same coverage, I went to Armero, Colombia. Again, spur of the moment. There was a mudslide there that killed 22,000 something people. This volcano erupted, melted the ice, flooded this place, and you had to somehow manage to get into this place to photograph it. And you're shooting as you go in. What you're doing is you're shooting, you're looking and you're reacting to what you're seeing. Then you start getting closer to these people that have been so horribly impacted by this. And it's interesting that after major coverage comes from incidents like this, you very often see a response from the public of donations, of providing help to these things. So there is a reason for doing this too. So, but it's a tough thing to do. I mean, sometimes you want to step in and help. Where do you draw that line versus trying to be a human? But just these horribly sad things you're seeing in front of you, that your responsibility is to convey that. You're the conduit, you're the visual conduit for your audience to see what this is so they can see it. Because again, how important photos are to us. But it's interesting, all this stuff, I look back again, I took some languages in school and this kind of thing. I felt I was prepared to photograph these things. This guy caught in the mud, and there's a famous picture of a little girl that I did not include in this because it's a very heartbreaking photograph. But you're trying to convey the horror and what's going on in these situations. Because it's so easy to be at a distance and read about it, but the visuals, you can't ignore those things. And then in late 70s, I shot with my best friend from Dallas. He was a photographer too, named Skeeter. Great Texas name, isn't it? He and I shot this Peter Jenkins did a walk across America. He went into National Geographic headquarters with his dog and said, I'm going to walk across the country and you ought to do a story on me. And they said, well, that sounds cool. Just in case, let me give you a camera in case. So he shot the first half of the trip. They ran the story, stopped in Dallas to work to make more money to finish it. They ran the first half of the story. It was I think it was the most popular story they ever ran. So he had kind of carte blanche to do whatever he wanted. I met him in Dallas and my friend Skeeter when he was working at a restaurant, buddied up with him. I had to shoot him on assignment. He said, hey, you ought to shoot me on the rest of the way. So this is my first, I'm happy Skeeter got the cover out of this thing, of course. But it was kind of like, it was pictures of them walking. Like here they are walking here they are walking across Uncompahgre Pass. And then they finished it in Florence, Oregon. But I also didn't think I was ready to shoot for Geographic. In our world of photography, Geographic is really it. That's the ultimate. And I shot this, and I continued doing newspaper work, kind of honing it towards the idea I want to do work with Geographic. And I won the Pulitzer in '83. And you probably think, well, wow, you can call your shots with that. Not really. This is a tough business. It's like, what's the greatest thing you've done for us right now? That's history. At Pulitzer's history. It's a door opener. You get people's attention. But I knew the photo director with Geographic. And I had just remarried and found the person in my life and all this thing. And I didn't want to make the decision about working for Geographic. I wanted to approach him. This is early 80s, mid 80s. But it was legendary that Geographic photographers' relationships had a huge divorce rate. Because you can be gone 10, 11 months of the year, literally. And I didn't want to make that choice. And so he called me a couple of times and said, we'd really love you to, and it was pretty obnoxious on mine. It was like, well, I'll call you back, Tom. And would hang up and just continue doing my stuff. And finally, I saw him at a thing in World Press in New York, going up to as a spokesman for him. And he asked my wife and I to sit at the table with him, and he said, I really want you to work for us. So I started working with him in '88 and photographed the Yellowstone fires, and then went on to Papua New Guinea. And what I'm going to show you now is a group of photographs. When I shoot a story for Geographic, if I shoot 2 or more pictures anywhere, I enter the world of visual narrative. Most of my work today is with Geographic Expeditions. 2007 or 8, they asked me to start working with them. It was a small department. They were doing a few trips, and they wanted to have a geographic photographer on board some of these trips to lecture, provide information as a geographic expert. So I started doing that. This has exploded. I just 2 days ago came back from the Galapagos. I was there for 3 weeks. Then just before that, I was on a around the world by private jet trip. It's a tough job, I know it, but someone has to step forward to do it. And then in Namibia before that, and then I forget a bunch of places. I'm gone 4 to 7 months a year still. But again, the point I want to give you all is when I shoot something, I enter this world of visual narrative, and I suggest it to you too, for anybody in this kind of world. And one of the most important things, you have to create a sense of place to your viewers. So I'm in Sri Lanka, photographing the stilt fishermen. Shoot a slow exposure to get the moving water with the bodies up on those stilts. Sense of place is generally the big overview photograph. It tells us something about the place, the Ilulissat ice fjords. But it has a nice little moment, the water coming out of the waterfall. Or in Kyoto, Japan. And what I suggest to people too is don't always shoot something from your respective 6'2", 5'7" height. Look up, look down, look around. Again, if you see something make you react, wow, maybe I should be photographing that. In South Georgia, and I'm always looking for a moment in a photograph, something to slightly divorce it from a boring photograph. But these are caracaranists trying to scare me away. And I kind of stood there and watched it for a while, and I've got the nice little flow of the boat coming in the background. And this is a layered photograph of information. And I give reason for the sky to exist. So I've got cool clouds, I've got the nice bird motion. In South Georgia, going to that slow exposure again. And what I love about photography to me is photography is always problem solving. You put the camera to your eye because the dynamic is forever changing in front of the camera. What can I do to make this work? It's a great potential scene. Don't miss the moment, but you pick it up and you shoot it, and then you keep the camera to your eye and think, what can I do to improve on this? What I see aspiring photographers do regularly is something really good is happening, and all that idea of carefully framing, watch the edges, that goes out the door. And all you try to do is put the camera in the middle and shoot it. Give it a second, give it a few seconds, and think, and if you have that luxury of time, what if I bring the camera over this way? What if I watch my edges? Oh, there's some ugly stuff coming in there. Again, you're responsible for everything going on there in that viewfinder. Story for Geographic on bat radar tracking. We use this as an opener on this story, photographing these huge bat populations that come out of these caves. I'm using 2 flashes intentionally because I want the bats, not birds or mammals, to be blown out because I want to look ethereal. But my main exposure is the background. So it's again that always thinking thing. I told my daughter I'd get her picture in here. I did a trip in Patagonia a couple of years ago, and she and I stayed on to hike a couple of weeks. If Maggie were looking at the camera, it would be a picture about Maggie. But right now it's a picture of the scene with her looking up there, bringing your kind of a diagonal, bringing your eyesight up there. Taj Mahal, I've been lucky, been able to photograph that. So you get out there and you get the cliche picture of the Taj Mahal. It looks very nice. And then you want to get there early, then you go there another morning when the fogs are coming off the Yamuna River. Well, work the situation. So you walk over to the side mosque. When the side mosque is just being exposed from the fog, and the 2 people come down there. So again, I'm always watching through that viewfinder to see that dance of what's going on, looking for that moment. And I'll tell you, this is a manic depressive business. Because when you get it, it's like, this is the best thing since canned beer. When you miss it, it's like, I'm going to go work at McDonald's. I hate this. I cannot stand this business. And you're always watching light. Light drives everything. Light can become that partner to moment, too. So you're in Grand Didier Channel in the Antarctic, and the light comes out on a tabular iceberg for a few seconds. Or a cliche picture down in Santa Fe of a church when the light comes out, and I had a workshop going down there, and I thought something was going to happen, everybody left. And I'll tell you something too. If you listen to my suggestions, you may not be that fun a person to travel with anymore. I can't tell you how many times I've told my wife, and she was a photographer, if we sit here just 4 more hours, the light might get nice. And my George O'Keeffe ripoff, this is shot for Geographic on Iceland many years ago. But again, I'm just watching the light and watching what you're reacting to. And another story for Geographic on the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. I had solid blue sky, which is really birdie boring in photographs. So what I've done is I put my horizon line at the very top to get rid of that sky. And I've got the foundation of this hill on the left with that cool information going across the center. one of my first stories for the magazine in '88 in Papua New Guinea, and was there for 3 months, 6 weeks incommunicado. My wife was pregnant with our daughter. It's a tough business on relationships, but this guy was walking through this Stone Age village with a lantern, so I did a long exposure knowing that I could, and the sky looked almost pitch black to your eye. But I knew if I balanced the exposure, I knew that exposure is cumulative, so I would get that nice balance on things. Ironman triathlon, I shot this for Budweiser, nice client. And I love this flurry of activity, the arms pulling you through. Again, one thing I think you do successfully as a photographer is you put your audience in the frame. Once you engage them, once you pull them in there, and these are all that sense of place picture. Have you noticed every picture is kind of the big landscape that shows something about place? Sorry for the magazine on a river system in Alaska, Tachinchini-Alsek. We use this as the opener. Sense of places don't always have to be the opener, but they often do that because it tells our audience where you are, what's cool about this place. Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Arizona, so where they send all the retired B-52s. And I had a helicopter, which is always nice when they can provide that. But I'm also shooting, and I'm really carefully framing it because about 1 degree above that, there's a road. If I put the road in there, it breaks the integrity of the repeating patterns. And a kind of boring picture is Angel Falls, tallest waterfalls on Earth. I'm sure you all saw the movie Up. Remember that movie, how cool it was? That was based on the Tepuis in southeastern Venezuela. That's Angel Falls, tallest waterfalls on Earth. It's a perfectly adequate picture. But when I shoot from helicopters, I have both doors off and I wear a climbing harness so I can stand out on the skid and get away from it. I have a strap attached to me. So the pilot said, "You want to go see Angel Falls close up?" So I said, "Yeah." So you get a cooler picture. You know, he tilts it, you're hanging from the strap. Again, you have to stop your audience. But again, these are sense of place photographs. And a story for the magazine on a small, little bitty river in Upper Michigan Peninsula. It was Ernest Hemingway had written a famous short story about it. Namibia and the sand dunes down there. And a small forest and little village in mid-Pyrenees of France. So you get that pretty picture in the afternoon. And you go back the next morning to see what's changed and the whole light shifted. This is one thing about being married to another photographer. My wife and I are always looking at light going, "Oh my God, look at that." And a friend of mine in Baja, in Galapagos, Salimas, with Salimas, I like the nice moment of the feet being spread like that. To me, that's an important component of that photograph. And a bunch of penguins come out of the ocean in Falkland Islands, Isla Malvinas to be correct. But I'm also backing up with them as they come out because I want to provide that breathing room right there. I also want to provide room over on that penguin on the left. So again, you're always thinking, what can I do to make this work? And I've got cool sky, so I can have the sky in there. And I've split the horizon dead center, which you're not supposed to do. But again, I think what it comes down to in this craft is if the image works. And using a long telephoto in Namibia for landscape lens. And then I'll make this quick. This is a horrible reproduction of a film picture. This is a story on the Yukon River I shot. And we use this as a major, for the Geographic. And we use this as a major picture in the story. And after it published, Geographic Adventure called me and they said, "Ooh, we loved your picture of the birth of the Yukon." That's what that is. We want to use it as a cover. Ooh, that's an ego stroke, let me tell you, a cover. Everybody's going to be able to look at that. Look at the complexity of the color in the water. Look at the gradation here. Ooh, look at the delta fanning out there. All these things people are going to be able to luxuriate in this photograph of mine to enjoy. And that's what they do with it. That's the reality of publishing. So what's the next thing you do? Introduce your cast of characters. So I'm photographing a geisha in Kyoto. And what attracts me to her, look at that makeup, look at the lips. And I shoot with a really ultra-fast lens so I can shoot it wide open so I can drop everything else out of focus. Or Pilgrim in Sri Lanka. I read a study done once, and you know what we look for first in photographs? We look for eyes. Then we look for sharpness. Then we look for diagonals. Eyes are engaging. Eyes are hugely powerful. Up along the Hmong family, along the Chinese-Vietnamese border, if you have atmospherics of snow and rain and clouds and stuff, wonderful to get out and shoot in, but be careful because it's easy to get blown out skies. I try not to ever set pictures up because it stinks of being set up. So I'm always moving around, working, try to get the people used to me so I kind of become invisible. And I put Mom up to take care of that big blown out spot up there. And just that disgusting little picture of the cute thing of the mother in Botswana. But point is, we like asymmetry in images. We like threes. We don't like twos and evens and things like this. So I've kind of got the energy, the eyes going all there. And I chased this darn llama around Machu Picchu for about an hour. I'm shooting with a 24 equivalent at f11. Why am I shooting f11? Because I want the zone of focus. Because if the llama is sharp and the background's out of focus, it's about the llama. But now it's an environmental portrait of llama and its environment. And I was photographing this young Himba in Namibia or in Tanzania, and it was okay. It's like a boring picture. It's in her hut. It just wasn't coming together. But you stay with it. And she walked outside, and to me, the most interesting picture occurred. It tells you something about her world, her place. I don't need to see her face. It's about those incredible mud plats in their hair. And ladies of a voodoo tribe in Benin in West Africa. And I sat there for 20 minutes waiting for that lady to look and to get that boom, boom, boom of information, letting that background slightly fall out of focus. And you ever think you're at the wrong party? So in the Antarctic, and it's king penguins with a bunch of molting ones. But again, if I raise that camera half an inch, I start getting mud in the background. And I've left space across which the bird can look. That's that rule of thirds stuff and all that. But again, I'm always reacting like, what looks cool? What's going to be engaging here? And a young Maasai, watching his cattle herd, 20-second exposure, and I'm painting his light with a flashlight during that. He wondered what the heck I was doing. But I'm trying to balance, so I've got a star field in there and that. It doesn't have to be people. It's a walrus in the Arctic. And, cameras turn vertical, thinking about doing vertical. A friend of mine in Wyoming. And for those of you studying photography, you've studied the color wheel where you have opposite complementary colors. And when you bring those complementary colors of warm and cold in, it becomes intellectually appealing to us. So I've got the warmth of the campfire, and I don't have his eyes in it because it's a picture about Buck that's his name. But if his eyes are down, it's a generic wrangler. This is an environmental portrait. It's an albatross chick in South Georgia. And you can tell by this picture that's probably not Kansas. So the information is critically relevant to your audience. You're always, well, do I need a picture of close-up of the albatross chick? Well, maybe, but let's work the situation. Let's put it within its environment. Or in Sri Lanka, using a long lens so you can isolate, you can drop that background out of focus. A young comedian in Leningrad waiting introduction. A lot of geographic photographers don't like using flash. And I light pretty well, but I love shooting under ambient light. And a young Maasai walking up the hill in Gora Gora Crater. And Hadza people, one of the oldest bloodlines on Earth, stopping these hunter-gatherer hunting, stopping in the midday heat to rest in a tree. And again, carefully not bringing in the edge of the tree. And when you shoot a story for Geographic, you've always got to include some verticals as cover possibilities with space to put the name of the magazine up there. And this was an old guy photographed some years ago, was on oldest postman in the United States. So I was photographing and nothing was coming together. He said, well, I've got my last mailbox down the road. I said, I'll meet you down there. So I went down there and put a flash in the thing, didn't tell him, opened it up, shot my one picture. But the point is that my main exposure is the background. All I'm doing, I generally like using flash to supplement existing light. So my main exposure, so all I'm doing is adding light where I want my audience to look. And then a street guy in Marrakesh. And I try never to pay for photographs. In some places you have no choice. This guy sat down with him. I said, may I take your picture? I gave him a little bit, but let me tell you, it's never pay children, period, never pay children. But it's just kind of working the situation with him. But these are all introducing our cast of characters. And we editorialize with photography too. This guy in Jordan, he looks pretty dangerous, but you step back 3 feet and you tell a whole different story with him. So you are cautious with the storytelling process. A young girl in the Gobi in Mongolia. And again, I'm just leaving a separation on the left and right side of the pictures, waiting for the little moment of her hand going up to her head. She was a caretaker. This guy in India, just overhang, that reflected light from baby Taj Mahal, filling the light in on him. Beautiful lights. You're always looking for light sources. And a boat captain in Greenland, or this young Boer woman in Madagascar, or this guy in Egypt. And I waited about 8 minutes for this picture because there were cars on the road, and the cars dated the photograph. So again, be aware of everything going on in the photograph. And I've got asymmetry going on, and there are three things, which again, we kind of like. And I was in Lhasa, Tibet, and I saw last year, and I saw this old lady. I was running through town trying to get somewhere, and I saw her, and I was like, oh my God. And I've got a pretty big presence, so I went running up to her. She was doing the circumnavigation of the Potala Palace. And through sign language, can I photograph you? So I shot one picture, and then she just cracked up laughing. So you're always looking for those moments. You always get asked, how many pictures do you shoot for a geographic story? As if quantity equates quality. And my response is always, it doesn't matter. You shoot till you get the picture. Some of these where it's just literally two frames. Or Holy Man in Kathmandu, Nepal. Remember what I said about eyes, how we look at them. There are a lot of eyes going on there. Using an 840 millimeter equivalent lens. It took me an hour and a half to finally have this picture come together. Again, you have to realize, when do I invest that time? But the next thing we include in there is detail. And detail brings that information to your audience that they hadn't thought of. The big landscape is made up of all this minutia of detail. So I'm photographing this horse in Arizona. Oh, beautiful light in the muzzle, a nice, cool picture. And then the fly comes in there and lands on its nose. It's a Where's Waldo photograph. You get them on the initial, oh wow, look at that pretty light. Then you get them on part 2, and a bunch of dead termites in a mud puddle. To me, it looked like a painting. And you can tell this guy's probably not a hedge fund manager. This is important information. So you're always looking to see, it's an okay picture, but it gives you good information on what's going on. Blue-footed booby, or a sea turtle, it waited forever, had a camera down at water level waiting for this thing to come up. 2 frames on it, but it kind of came together. And then as a king penguin comes out, the incredible water beating on its breastplate, just incredible. So detail, again, like I said, forces your audience to see maybe components of the photograph, components of the scenery, components of the landscape that they hadn't thought of. And a whale in Mexico coming up, 2 frames again on this one, had the camera down at water level, waiting for that moment, trying to create something a little quirkier. What's the next one? This is the cool one, moments. This is where we bring the power in to your reportage. So this is a banded sea crate. It's about 10 times the toxicity of a cobra. So I'm snorkeling with them. There's hundreds of them around. And they told me they're really reticent. Just don't tick it off. So I'm swimming around. I'm shooting with an underwater housing. It's a 14, so this thing's about this far from me. And I went up to this one, and I think I bumped it. It reacted. It's got that cool moment. And I thought, well, what ticks off a banded sea crate? I'm not quite sure. And then a story for Geographic on the Yukon River with a Yupik getting ready to harpoon a seal. We use this, and we do not get to manipulate photographs. That's one thing I love about it, because what's out there, you can color correct, you can shadows and highlights and those kind of things. You cannot remove and add things to photographs. We use this as a main big gatefold opener in this story because it had the power of the moment. And a lot of these villages in India now try to create autonomous systems of water, health, education, because they're so poor. So this little girl's drinking from a freshwater pump in this little bitty village outside Agra. And then horses in the Ukraine. But it's moment. Moment brings power to your photograph. It brings energy. You can build the story up to that, let it fall off. But it's incredible stuff to have in your story. Now, a lot of you are thinking, well, this is similar to what a writer does. Yeah, we're doing the same thing. But I always kind of think the photographer writes with light. And that's what's so fun about this. And they call it a moment because it doesn't happen very long, but you're always looking for that. And that's from the workshop we do up in DuBois, Wyoming. Nice moment on the horse, the mane right there, the light coming through it. But boy, you can hang everything on that. You can build up to the moment. You can descend from the moment up in Montana, where you put the camera in the grass to get the horses running by and remotely trigger it. Nice moment with the lariat in the foreground. Hazardous Materials Training Center in Colorado, where they bring in governmental entities and train them how to deal with hazardous materials explosions and all. Or in Marrakesh, shot 3 weeks ago, this guy, what he does is he feeds the fire underneath the city baths for the hot water baths, but the moment of the flame. But this is critical for it. A story I did for the magazine on a nuclear attack sub, scientific program up in the Arctic. And I got on the sub and spent a week under the Arctic ice on that thing. But just a moment, and we use this as a significant picture. Real simple picture, but it's got the nice ice coming off the thing. And then sometimes you just got to be ready. The photo god's got to be looking out for you. So I'm in the Antarctic photographing this Bergy bit. That's a piece of ice, 3 to 5 meters tall. Oh, isn't that lovely? There's some guy sitting by me with his camera looking the other direction. And then all of a sudden this penguin explodes out and gets up there and almost gains purchase and slips on his stomach and back in the water. This is about a 2-second event. One thing I tell photographers in general, when the camera goes on around your neck, to me it's a switch that goes on in your head that I'm immediately thinking and seeing photographically. The camera is ready, everything is to go, it's your job. And then in Barcelona, where they do these human towers, so you're using these structural elements and kind of pointing all the energy going in, and you step back again and you see the human tower they built that they send the 10-year-old kid to the top to peek it out. I shot NFL football for years, so knew the rule of thumb to start stopping motion was 1/500th of a second. But I'm in the Antarctic in a boat moving, and in this penguins, they explode out of the water, so I know I've got to take it to 2,000ths of a second to get that razor sharp edge. Moments don't have to slap you upside the head. Moments can be real quiet. It's my son in Grand Cayman, him reaching out, touching the stingray, or a kid in Italy at a wedding. But moments can be gentle and quiet, or a young bronco rider getting ready to, yelling to let him out the chute. Or in Namibia, deciding to photograph a cheetah and go into a slow shutter so you can get that power of the animal as it goes by. Or in the Antarctic is a porpoising. It's kind of a graphic one. This is a leopard seal disengaging a penguin chick from its head. Again, I needed to go to a high shutter speed to capture that. Or the dance of this. And so my camera is generally always ready, always available. And I love this picture. And I'm really hardcore on my pictures. If it sucks, it sucks. But I get those pictures and they're like, I still like this picture. And this is a wave breaking. This is my homage to Hasukai, who was a famous Japanese artist that did a beautiful painting of a wave breaking in front of him. That's up in the Canadian archipelago. So what's the last thing you do in that photographic series? You close your story. All those other components you can kind of place around, but the closing, you've got to kind of close with it. And they generally are simple pictures, often the end of day, because we connote that with moving out, finishing. They don't create a lot of narrative. A bunch of famous cowboy artists, we use this as the closer on the story. Just a simple road shot driving to Wyoming. But again, they don't create a narrative, a new narrative for the viewer to engage in to move out of the story. Or following a marine iguana. But again, it's going away, so it kind of tells us the end. We're the only culture that bases our weather prognostication on a rodent. This is Punxsutawney Phil. Story on weather forecasting for the magazine. We use this as the closing picture. Or up in Smith Island in the Chesapeake at the end of the day, we get that gentle balance of background and ambient light. But you notice they generally are simple. Let our audience finish up. This is the last story we use on the Yukon story, this oldest guy in this village. And we use this as the closer. But again, it's very simple. Or a sea turtle in Galapagos. Just kind of wraps it up, finishes it to me. Or the final one is this in Taj Mahal, it's the Yamuna River. Great thing about pollution, you get incredible light. It can be really wonderful. And I read this quote by Yogi Berra years ago, and that's it. And I love this quote. And I want to show you something real quick. Here's some websites if you're interested. Let me see if this brings it up. Yeah, I've got websites. Mine is jdickmanphotography.com or jdickman.net. But jdickmanphotography.com. And my First Light workshops, who Frank Varney works with me, is my co-instructor. Were you out there, Frank? Okay. And the other one is my blog. And it was pretty cool because have you ever heard of Photo Blog? It's a big photo blog, international one. I just got a notice 2 days ago that my Where's Jay was considered one of the best blogs in the world. And that's about Photo Shelter, DP Review, all these other ones. So it was pretty cool. Now, geographic websites. I suggest to you, whatever type photography you're in, because I think it empowers you to start working on shooting constantly. Does anybody send anything to National Geographic Your Shot? Okay, start doing it. Every month they do an assignment. They offer an assignment. And it's almost like an Instagram site, except it's horizontal and vertical. And you can submit 3 to 5 pictures a month based on that. And they bring a curator in to curate the images, and they break those images. I curated the first time they did it out of building, and they asked me what I wanted to do, and I said moment. So I did moment. I took 24,300 images and whittled that down to 20. And then they picked from those 20 for the daily dozen, and then they picked one of those to run in the magazine. And it's incredible to look at it because if you want to be intimidated, try it out, because you're going to see some incredible work in there. Geographic Photography, the photosociety.org is a very cool website. It's for geographic photographers who've shot multiple stories. It's an external website, but they become kind of the de facto contractual group for us. And the National Geographic Photography, their Instagram site, the most viewed Instagram site in the world. It's amazing to post something on there because you get thousands of likes in seconds. So I want to thank you all for your time. I'm here to answer questions. If anybody has questions, I'd be glad to answer them. I can get out of the searchlight. I can answer all sorts of questions. I can make up answers.
We do have a little bit of time if there are any questions out here. And if not, I definitely have a couple I can get us started. I'll get to you next. Wait a minute, Randy. You had your turn up there. I'm kidding.
I'm about to get started. Yeah, I think, Jay, one of the things that really I'm curious about is the experience of the photographer. I think you said when the strap is around your neck, you go into a different kind of zone. But, what is it like to be there and looking through the lens of a camera and, anything from seeing, the beauty and elegance of penguins jumping on ice and at the same time other individuals maybe being killed by death squads. What is that like for you personally?
Boy, that's a good one. It's abstract in many ways. What I love about it is being the viewer, being the conduit for your audience. You get to experience these things firsthand. You're out there. You're often defining visually to your audience how they'll recall it, how they'll remember it. Remember the drill I did at the start, 9/11, all that stuff. Often you make images that will be that foundation of memory for that particular event. What a heavy-duty responsibility that is to make sure you're accurate and that you're correct. It's incredible to get to see the world through a camera. Why I love shooting pictures is that I love photographing people, and I never hesitate within safety reasons, especially these days, to approach somebody in a foreign country or domestically, whether I can speak their language or not, and say, essentially, can I step into your world? And to me, this is why I traveled, is to get into that veneer of tourism. So you get to me, the camera's been a passport, a reason to approach someone, a reason I can't tell you the number of friends I've made worldwide, I've been invited to stay over, eating dinner with folks, have stayed friends with them for years. I have many friends like that. So the camera has just given me that much more a view of the world, to my way of thinking. Our kids grew up. One reason we put up with my travel, is we want our kids to be able to travel with me so they could have a view slightly beyond the borders of the U.S. And they both are passionate travelers now. They're not photographers, thank God. It's too tough a business, man, I'll tell you. But what I love about it is this step under the tourism look of the world, is the ability to step in and to have an understanding. What else I love about it is when you shoot a story for the magazine, going back to my education, a contract for the magazine say you have a month-long contract. Wow, that's a long time. About 70 to 80% of that time is your research. I'm doing my own research. When the story comes out, I'm involved with the layout too. The writer's not telling me what to photograph. They bring us both in at the start to do a story conference to make sure we're both on the same page thematically. And that is often the last time I'll see the writer, by their choosing and my choosing. Because what the reader benefits from the magazine is they get this narrative, visual narrative, and they get text narrative that are both addressing the same theme of the story. You get that much richer a story. So that's one other thing I love about it, is that immersion you get into a story. It's not just, here's what you go photograph. It's, here's a story, start the research, we'll see you in 3 months. You come back, you show your body of work to them. You hope they tell you you're on the right path, keep shooting. There's lesser responses you can get that I won't go into. And then you come back at the end and you do the same thing. And you're showing 30 to 50 images to them. There's going to be 12 photographs in the story. I'm building a narrative to them to tell the story more overall. Then you go into layout. And then we decide which pictures are going to go on that what's going to be the connective tissue holding these images together. And then the photographer actually walks the editors through a thing called the wall walk, where the story is laid out to size, to exact number of pages. We've got like 20 editors in there. The photographer walks through, here's how we're going to open this. We're going to go from this to this to this to this. Then you show a group, a folder of images. Then maybe the editor will argue and say, well, we thought about this, but we decided to use this one. And then they say, okay, that's it. It's going to be published. And man, that is a rush. I'll tell you, to realize that millions of sets of eyes and minds are going to be impacted by your vision, by how you see it. And that's what I was saying too, that so much of the schooling I went through, I call upon in that research, which is critical. That's, if you don't know how to do that, and if you don't understand visual narrative, you'll never shoot for the magazine. Does that answer that?
Yeah, so thank you so much for coming and speaking to us.
Sure.
It's wonderful to hear you speak. But my question really is, it's a difficult one, but if you had to only choose 1 or 2 lenses to take with you on a journey like this, and I know you discussed the importance of narrative and moments, and that being the most important, but if you only had 1 or 2 lenses to choose, which ones would you take with you?
Boy, Frank, that's a perfect one, isn't it? That is a great question, and actually, I'm a minimalist, and I use a brand that I'm an Olympus user, and I like it because it's lightweight, very small, and I won't go into that spiel. I'm going to get off my soapbox, but I try to always work with 2 bodies, and I shoot with a wide-angle zoom and a telephoto zoom, usually short, like a 24 to 120, something like that, and a 80 to 300. For most assignments, unless it's sports or wildlife specific, those 2 lenses cover all your bases. What you're going to find is often your best zoom lens will be your feet. A friend of mine, a geographic photographer, said, if you want to shoot more interesting pictures, put yourself in front of more interesting things. And that's really true too. But those 2 lenses, what I like about it is that I'm usually not carrying a camera bag. And I'm not carrying a bunch of fast lenses or long lenses. And then, because if I've got that bag around my shoulder, I'm thinking, well, I've got this lens, maybe I ought to start looking for those kind of pictures. Then it's taking me out of the process of seeing photographically. So I love minimizing with just those 2 bodies. And I use one of those strap things that I hate, that I thought were the nerdiest looking things. That I started using, I was like, oh my God, this is great. But those 2, then all of a sudden it's about what's happening out here and what's going on up here. And again, the more you know the equipment, the more it gets out of the way. And when I shoot the 2 bodies, they're identical bodies. So there's no interference of picking one up. Oh, wait a minute, different menu system. You know, the UN should make a requirement that all menu systems are the same. Menu systems are horrible. But those 2 lenses, if I were going to shoot with only 1 lens, I have my lens that I know I'd use. It's a 24 to 200 equivalent. Covers so many bases, huge bases. F4, so it's just fast enough. And technology today is so good that you can shoot high speed and get away with it. But one thing I suggest to you all, Try doing this sometime. What we've done, I've done workshops years ago where we issued everybody a camera with a 35 millimeter lens and the equivalent today of a 512 meg card. Yeah, oh my God. Yeah. Whoa, wait a minute. So you had 20 pictures to shoot for the day. Knock yourself out. But think of Jim Brandenburg, geographic photographer who shot the book Chasing the Light, that he shot 1 frame a day for a year. Not 20 frames to get to one, but 1. And it forces you, and that's where I was really fortunate to grow up with film, because film was a tremendous teacher to me. Because you'd be shooting something where the things were happening very fast, and you put a new roll of film in, and you learn to read situations. Oh my God, it's building, and you're doing a count: 20, 19, 18, 12, 11 frames left. The moment's about to happen. Do I change film or do I slow down? So often you slow down and really force yourself to engage. I never missed a picture, of course. And if you believe that, I've got a bridge for sale too. But does that make sense? That minimizing things. Because I see people with these big honking cameras and they've got all their lenses and you're, in some ways, unless it's specifically for that, I think you're missing the point. And again, I don't care what you shoot it with. I have people that come to the workshops, well, I've got this equipment. I was like, tell your troubles to Jesus. Show me what you can do with this camera. You know, it comes down to the image. So does that answer that?
It does, yes,
Good.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Hi, Jay. So thanks so much for being here.
Absolutely.
I'm just curious, when you have to wait for those moments, you know, like the 4 hours waiting for the light and everything, like, are you feeling like stressed, like, you know, I have to get a better photo of this Taj Mahal, like I don't want it to look like everything else, or are you just like happy to have found your composition and just wait there for it? And also what's the longest you've ever waited? Thank you.
What's the longest I've ever waited? I'll go backwards. Longest I ever waited for a photograph was a week. There was one picture I had of a U-pick going ready to throw a harpoon at a thing with the clouds behind. I was doing a story on the Yukon River, and I knew a picture like that kind of was there. I just wasn't coming. And they give you every inch of rope to hang yourself with. And I was making a call like, I know this picture exists. So I stayed on and stayed on. I was going out seal and whale hunting with them. And literally the last day I allowed myself this luxury of time. And I was sweating bullets because, okay, I've just spent a week of this contract on this one image. There's another geographic photographer who's doing a story on Bengal tigers. He spent a month on one picture. Not everybody gives you that luxury, trust me. It can be very stressful when you're really hanging yourself out there and it's not coming together. Often you learn in this business when to cut your losses. Like it's not coming together, whether it's people or whatever. And it's like, okay, let's back out of this. But I've missed those pictures too. I could tell you a story of a picture that I missed years ago that I didn't sleep for almost 2 weeks after that because it was so horrible. But other times you learn to read situations where you sense it building, you feel it's building, you stay with it, and then it happens, and you shoot and you've got it. And this is another nice thing, and the great thing about digital is you can confirm you've got it. But boy, I hate it when I see digital photographers shoot and chimp, and then they miss the picture because they're looking at the picture on the camera. Use that thing to confirm composition, use a histogram to confirm exposure, then you stay with it. The great thing about digital, you can shoot all you want. I think Frank's heard me say this a bunch. The horrible thing about digital, you can shoot all you want. And you have to learn to really slow it down. But am I answering that question? Okay, because it really is a thing of, yes, there are those times where you'll spend hours and nothing happens. Oh, frustration. And other times when, and your senses tell you and you stay with it and it happens. And I'll tell you, when you've shot long enough, you know it the second you press a shutter. You know it. And it's, the skies open up and the rays of light are shining on you and the angels are singing and everything like that. And it's incredible. And you have that confirmation ability on that camera too. So I hope that answered that.
I think we got one more back here.
So when you're in places like, or in volatile situations like El Salvador, maybe the Middle East, what kind of safety precautions do you take?
What kind of what?
Safety precautions.
What kind of safety precautions? One of the greatest safety precautions was having photographed a lot of situations that were very tense, dangerous before. Because what's happening is it's so easy in an intense situation like that to get so zoned on, look at this, that you're not aware of the danger going on around you. And that's one thing I felt fairly comfortable with, is that when things are really happening way out of control into a dangerous level, and there's things going on 360 around you, it's really easy to get involved in that 6 degrees in front of you. But shooting and being aware, so having the hypersensitivity of what's going on. My Spanish was pretty good. I look back at my school in Spanish, how important that was. Same thing. And so being prepared, knowing the danger, and you're addressing that specific situation, so I'll address that specific situation. And I had 2 very close calls myself. I had 2 photographer friends who were killed. And when I won the Pulitzer, the paper I was working with wanted me to go on to Beirut next. And it was very tempting, because I think you can make important, impactful photographs. And honestly, I think probably adrenaline is up there with heroin, seriously. I'm not trying to be clever. Because when you get into something when the things are happening real fast, and you're able to get those images, it's very impactful. So being ready, and that's what I was talking about with Salvador. I saw a lot of young photographers that were, they'd want to go out into the countryside with you. And you talk to them for a second, you realize that could be a liability. And I wasn't there to be training somebody. I was there to get images. So you travel with other photographers, and I hope that answered that.
Unless there's any last burning
Well, thank you.
question?
I
Yeah.
appreciate
Jay, thank you so
greatly your
much.
time.
Let's give it up for Jay. Thank you, Jay.